Hello, sinners, and hail Sappho. It's your hostess with the mostest, Narcissa DeVille, and this week I am going to be talking about sort of an update to my last week's video. So for those of you who didn't watch that, go watch it. So I decided to do this writing experiment where I wanted to borrow Stephen King's writing routine, but like kind of, right? I wasn't exactly borrowing his writing routine. I did make some changes just based on kind of my own things that I wanted to, do a little bit different. But ultimately, I did kind of pose the question at the end of the video because I was like, well, I wasn't editing as I go along because that's not something I really do, but do you think that's something that I should do? And nobody really responded, but it is kind of one of those things that it was something I was gonna have to start immediately if I wanted to do it anyway. So I just kind of took it upon myself and said, you know what, I'm just gonna do this. And if nobody wants to see it, then they just won't watch it and that'll be fine. This is one of those things where I did kind of want to just see if I could do it. And since I was already kind of on the train of writing a certain number of words per week, I kind of wanted to see if I could keep that up and also add this new thing, right? And I have to say, so just kind of as an update, I did keep up the writing a chapter a day. I didn't keep up with how I originally was writing a certain time of day. I decided to kind of drop that. I can say definitely that I have written fewer words, but also still finished the same amount of chapters. So I don't really know how that's possible. Mathematically, that doesn't make sense, but somehow I've managed it. I've managed to write technically fewer words according to my word count, but still managed to keep up with my one chapter per day. So, and still hitting the 2,300 words for each chapter, roughly. So I don't really know how that adds up. Mathematically, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think there was at least one chapter where I technically wrote it the night before. And there was one chapter where I had kind of just borrowed a version that I had already written. So I think that probably played into the numbers game. But essentially, I did do the amount of chapters that I needed, and I was just adding a new thing, which was editing as I go. And for those of you who don't know, editing as I go, or editing as you go as a writer, basically just means that I was, rather than, because what I normally do, right, I've been writing for 20 years, I talk about that all the time. Normally what I do when I'm writing a book, right, is I will write the entire first draft, if you will. Here's the thing, right? I wonder if other writers feel this too. I have never really looked at my book in terms of drafts. I have never once while writing a novel looked at it as oh, okay, this is my first draft, this is my second draft. That's not how I write. And I don't know anyone outside of school, high school, college, that writes things in draft. And that was always the thing that kind of got me when I was in school, was it's okay, you have to do your first draft, and then you have to do your revised draft, and then you have to do your final draft. And I'm just okay, I guess, but that's just not generally how I view my writing. And I think that's also part of the reason that when people talk about oh, your first draft should be terrible or whatever, I kind of don't understand that mentality, because I truly don't view my writing in terms of drafts necessarily. Yeah, there are edits and rewrites and things like that, but I don't know. And for me too, because I've been working on this story for the better part of 20 years, I really do feel at this point, this would be the 3 millionth draft. I don't even actually have a number. I could not give you an actual, and that's not even me being funny. That's just legitimately, I cannot give you a number for what draft this would be, because this is a story that I've been working on for 20 years. I almost said 30 years. Jesus. So I don't really have a draft number to give you in that sense, because when you've been working on a story this long, at a certain point, the whole draft system just goes completely out the window. Also, I don't know what's happening with this tape here, but I don't I don't care for this. Like, I don't like the fact that this tape is like trying to make a break for it already. It's been 3 seconds, and I'm not that sweaty. Like, I don't feel that I don't know what the hell. Oh, that's so pretty. Okay, sorry. I got distracted by my own makeup. So, like, for me personally, right, like, I would say I don't really do the whole draft thing. I don't view my writing in terms of drafts. I just kind of write what I write, and, you know, I guess you could probably call it a draft if you really, really wanted to, but that's just not how I personally view it. And so when I'm doing edits, I'm kind of just like, okay, this is just an edit. This isn't necessarily this doesn't make it a new draft. I'm not demarcating the first draft from the second draft, from the third draft, or anything like that. So I could not, like, I keep notes of like what changes, as far as like, I like to keep. Scrivener has this great feature that's called snapshots that allows me to, I think that's what it's called, that just allows me to like take a snapshot of what the document is before I make a change, then after I make a change, and I can kind of do a comparison of the two, and that's how I can see like what's changed between drafts. And I think that's a really great feature that Scrivener has. I love it. I use it all the time. I like kind of keeping track of like what I'm changing, just in case, in the odd chance I might want to change it back, or, you know, just to kind of keep an idea, just to like have an idea of like what changes between drafts. You know, it can be really interesting to know like where the story came from and how far it's evolved. But I would not, and I even said draft, even though I don't consider them drafts. It's interesting to see, you know, where your story has come from, where it's going, you know, just from a edit to edit basis. And sometimes I do it more than once, just if I feel like there's something I want to keep note of. It's just one of those things where I think it's a very useful feature. But like I said, you know, I don't necessarily look at them as drafts. I just kind of, you know, view them as, okay, this is, you know, my edited version versus my unedited version, right? Wow, that had so much fallout. For a long, long time, I did not do the whole edit as you go thing, right? Which is to say, like I said in the beginning, I kind of got distracted by myself. Typically when I'm editing, I like to write the whole novel and then edit all in one go. And what happens when you do that, I'm sure there are benefits for some writers, but one of the biggest drawbacks for me is that editing is always such a slog for me because of that. Like, it becomes this thing where when I'm editing, I truly, truly feel like I'm just so exhausted. And even if there's not like a ton of edits that technically need to be done, you know, just the whole fact that you're like having to look at this novel in like, it's the whole thing, right? You are now facing this whole huge novel. And if you haven't done any kind of editing for it, that just feels so intimidating, right? And there's definitely been times where I'm like, I get exhausted with like one chapter, and then I'm like, I'm just going to rewrite the whole thing, or I'm just going to shelve this for a while, which is not the attitude that you really want to have when you're supposed to be working on a novel, because then you're never going to finish anything. And so, and then you go 20 years still writing the same book. So, you know, welcome to my life. But I will say, I do think that for me, part of the whole appeal, right, of writing or editing as I go has to be that it is something, it's so different from how I normally do things. But also I think part of the appeal is simply that it's less work up front, if that makes sense. It is still, I mean, ultimately, writing a novel is a lot of work. There's no getting around that. But what I mean when I say less work up front is that you're editing and writing, and it doesn't feel like you're facing this huge novel, because you're just facing a chapter at a time. And I guess realistically, when you're editing even the whole novel, you are still facing just a chapter at a time, but you know that there's more coming, right? And I will say, so here's the funny thing, right? I kept this up for the most recent 4 chapters that I wrote. And I will say, I decided, I'm filming this as of Sunday. And I decided like, oh, I'm going to spend Saturday and Sunday, catching up with the other chapters. Because technically I started this on, I think I was already 11 chapters in. So I was 12 chapters in. So I had to start with chapter 12 as like, this is the chapter I'm going to edit. And then I'm writing 13 after that. So I still had 2 through 11 because I had technically written, or I had edited chapter 1 at one point. So I still had chapters 2 through 11 that I had to edit. And I thought, okay, I'm going to spend my weekend, I'm going to spend Saturday and Sunday editing 2 through 11. I got through chapter 2 yesterday, and it's now Sunday evening, and I have not started chapter 3. So you can imagine I'm not off to a great start with this process. But that's kind of the thing is like, and I do find it kind of funny because like I feel a little bit like, okay, well, I guess in a way, part of the reason that I'm procrastinating is because I am now facing exactly what I didn't want to have to face, like what this whole thing was supposed to solve, which is I don't have to face so many chapters all at once. And technically 11 chapters, that's like, I don't even know, 20,000-ish words or whatever, is better than facing a whole novel of 90,000 plus words at a time. But it's still a lot of work, right? So I was just kind of like, I have so much like ahead of me with this. And that's really like so exhausting. So I'm not looking forward to any of this. I shouldn't say it like that because, again, I do really love writing. I will say that. Editing is not my favorite part of the process, but I will say, for me, they always say, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And I agree with that statement. And I would say, for me, the thing about writing is, like, even on its worst day, I love writing more than I like any other thing that I could be doing. I love making art. I think it's so much fun to do the acrylic pours that I do. I love making YouTube videos. I think those are so much fun. This eye is really having a moment. And hey, I love makeup. I think this is so much fun. But I will say, I will take writing over any of these things any day of the week, even on its worst day, because writing has just always been the thing that I loved the most. You're just gonna have to forgive whatever the fuck is going on with this eye. I cannot explain it, like what happened here, but something happened and... Anyway, as I was saying, even when I'm doing stuff that I'm not like, is not my favorite, e.g. when I am editing, I still love writing so much. It's still the only thing that I would rather be doing with my life for the rest of eternity. So I went into this whole thing with some, I don't want to say trepidation, right? Because I did really go into this like curious. I went into both of these processes very, very curious because, editing as I go is something I've kind of really only done for fanfic. And that's one of the things I've talked about on this channel quite a bit, is that my experience with a lot of these things is more like fanfic related versus original fic related. And I've done both for a few years now. I will say for me, I guess the one thing I will say about fanfic, right, is that for better or for worse, I do kind of feel like it has made me a better writer in the sense that I don't really tried hard to get over my like perfectionist habits when it comes to like writing. I'm very, very happy with this process. Let me just spoil this a little bit because this is already going to be going on way too long by this point in the video. I like how it came out. I like the experience. I will keep doing this. It's less intimidating for me, which is funny because you'd think after like so many years of writing, you wouldn't really get intimidated by, facing a lot of, unwritten or not unwritten, facing the book as it is. You'd think you'd be like, well, I've been doing this for so long. Obviously, I know how this works. And that's true. But I would also just say, I don't know, for me personally, I just can't help but feel like, oh, can I just say, I don't talk about when I'm putting on my makeup, I don't really talk about the products I use all that much. And nobody really asks, which is fine. But I just have to say, I found because I had been missing this for like a hot second. I found my MAC full coverage again. I'm so glad, because I was just using this like Revlon full coverage because Trixie recommended it. I love you, Trixie. That is not for me. I did not feel like I was getting the coverage that I was accustomed to. Like when you say full coverage, to me, that is such a high bar for what it has to be in order for me to consider that full coverage. And like, you see all this redness that I have going on. Like, maybe the lighting doesn't make it as clear, but like for anyone who is unclear, I have a lot of redness going on in my face, just naturally, because I am like Irish and pale, and it's annoying as all hell to me. I will say that right off the bat. It's annoying as hell to be this pale. I don't even know what the last thing I captured was. So I was talking about my makeup. I guess that really doesn't matter because that's not what the point of this video is. I really did like this. I really did like this experiment. I like writing a chapter a day. I will say I haven't really, like I said, I haven't kept up with the time frame of it, which is to say I kind of still went back to my old habit of writing whenever. But hey, as long as you get the chapters written, it really doesn't matter the time. I was doing the time of day thing because I thought it was going to help my sleep schedule. It didn't. So at that point, it's like, does it really matter if you go back to doing it the old way? I don't know. I would say overall, I think this was very successful. I had so much fun with this. I think it went very, very well for me. And so I'm super excited about that fact because it is something that I can now work into how I write going forward. And that's a huge deal to me. You know what? I will say with this one, because I had been doing it already, it wasn't actually that difficult to get into. I don't think I had the difficulties with this that I did with the very, very first week when I was doing the writing a chapter a day. I think with this, I actually got into it really relatively easily. And I don't feel like I necessarily struggled with it as much. I think it was a little bit disheartening though, because that particular chapter that I was editing, for whatever reason, I wasn't connecting with it at the time. I kind of like had my doubts about it. And so I ended up like kind of changing quite a bit, and then I just felt very like off. So I think that part did throw me off because I did feel like the chapter itself was not my favorite. So that was kind of a rocky beginning in that sense. But I do feel like ultimately overall I was very happy with what I ended up with. You know, I don't think that subsequent chapters subsequent chapters were a lot easier for me to edit. I was more assured and confident about those edits. I liked them a lot better. So I think ultimately, you know, I did have a positive experience with this little experiment. I did think it went a lot easier than it did the first time around. Even though I did have that kind of rocky start, I do feel like it went over well, and I will continue doing this. So I think that's kind of important because I really went into this hoping that I could get a new routine. You know, like I said, I've changed a lot how I write over the years, what they call, you know, plotting versus pantsing, you know, writing by the seat of your pants. I used to only write by the seat of my pants. I hated doing an outline, and I'll do a whole video getting into that a little bit later, because I do think that's something that is worth talking about, but I think it should kind of be its own video. But as I've gotten older, plotting has become something that is necessary for me. I feel like I actually enjoy doing it, and I've kind of changed how I look at my outlines. So it's a whole big thing there. But as far as that goes, you know, it was like I changed this thing about my writing, but I still kept everything else that I was doing. And I wanted to kind of say, okay, well, I've already evolved this much. Let's see what more things I can add. I don't know that, I mean, for this particular book, I do like the idea of writing a chapter a day. I will say, I don't know, I think this experiment went really, really well, and I'm very happy about the results. I think it was a lot of fun, you know, and even though it was off to kind of a rocky start with the chapter itself, I ultimately like how it's come out. I like how it feels like I was kind of worried, I think, that it was going to feel like more work for me to do in the interim, and that it was going to slow down my writing process, but I think it feels like it's streamlined, because now I'm doing two things at once as opposed to just kind of like one thing, which is just writing. And I don't know what it is. I just really like it. I think it's going to be something that I incorporate going forward. And what I've been doing with this huge fanfic is basically the same thing. I will write the chapters, and then I will, you know, edit them. Usually what I've been doing is like the week before they're going to go up, I'll start editing them, and then the day before I'll do like one final edit. But I think it's kind of made me less like obsessed with the idea of perfection. I think there is this idea that we get into our heads as writers that like this has to be the most perfect edited version. It has to be the most polished. It has to be, you know, free from all of this stuff. And like, that's just not possible for one person to do. And the problem is if you're not careful, it's so easy to get bogged down in this mental spiral of like, I need this to be perfect. I need to do this. If I just change this, this will make a difference. If I just change that. And especially when you're trying to get published with a traditional publisher and you're trying to get an agent and you're getting rejections, but you're not getting told why you're getting rejections, which I think is one of the hardest parts of the writing process that I've experienced. You know, you get into your head and you think, okay, well, maybe if I did this, that would, you know, make me not get rejected. Or maybe if I change this or tweak this or do this or do this. You know, there's so many different things that you get into your head when a story is being rejected of like why and what you should change, because no one's telling you what is going on with it or what they don't like about it. And so you're just kind of left guessing. And for me, and especially when I was a lot younger and a lot less confident, I think that just kind of led me into this spiral of overthinking and trying so hard to like change things and make them better and do this and do that. And it never ended up working. And so I just like spiraled. And then when I decided to finally start publishing my fanfic and like people were loving it, I realized, oh my God, like this is not, you know, this is more of a agent publishing problem. This isn't necessarily a me problem. Like I am very good at this. People like what I write. It's very much like a specific thing within the publishing industry. And so that made me feel better. And that's not to say that I think I'm the best writer ever on earth. I think it's all very subjective, but I do find that it's refreshing to have people who are not yourself and not your friends reading your work, who are like, oh my God, I really enjoy this. This is really, meaningful. All the things that you want people to feel when they read your work, they're having, and you're like, okay. So it's not like this isn't a thing. Like, people really do like my work, and I am really good at this. So clearly, I don't have to go through this spiral. And I think that's helped me tremendously. And on that front, I do, I am so, so grateful to fandom and, fan fiction in general for kind of giving me that confidence boost, because I don't know that I would have had the confidence in 2020 after I had 2 years of writing fanfic and having it go so well. I don't know that I would have had the confidence to share an original novel like I did on Wattpad, which ended up getting featured for their Pride collection during 2021. That was a huge deal to me. And it's still kind of mind-boggling how that story ended up, it's like still going strong. People still like it and all of that today. It's had like 70,000 reads, which may not be a lot for 2 years, but that was the most anything I had done that was original got ever. Like, that's amazing to me for one story to have had 70,000 reads, and largely because it was featured like that. So, and that meant so much to me. Anyway, you can find all of that in the description below. You're also going to notice that I did have someone comment. I asked on my community page and also my Tumblr for any kind of like Q&A questions. If anyone had any questions for me about writing or fandom or anything like that, I would love to do a Q&A videos. I used to do them all the time. I've always loved doing Q&As. I think it's fun to like get to talk about things. But the only question I really got at time of filming was someone asked me to share my AO3 link. I have decided that I am going to include that in the link in the descriptions as well. So with all of my usual links to my Patreon, my Ko-Fi, my email if you want to email me, all of these other things that I have that's in my description, including my Wattpad, including my blog, all this other stuff, I am also going to include my Archive of Our Own account so that you can read all of the fan fiction that I've written, some for Good Omens and some for Hell of a Boss and Hazbin Hotel. Hazbin has kind of been my main focus. I really haven't written anything for Good Omens in quite a while. I do have a current project that I've been working on with Hazbin that I'm about 53,000 words that are published right now. So that's been really exciting. And I've written, like literally, I have written almost 800,000 words of fanfic just since August. That is so mind-blowing to me. I still don't know, like, I'm gonna do a video on this because I'm so close to 1 million, and I kind of want to see if I can hit 1 million before next August. I don't know, it's a whole thing. Anyway, if you enjoy this video, like, comment down below, tell me again, I always want to see, is editing as you go something that you do? I'd love to hear about other people's writing processes and like how you tick, because I like to know that I'm not the only one who's doing something. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I just like to know that I'm not alone in whatever it is that I'm deciding to do. So yeah, that is the video. You can also become a member of my channel. We have 2 tiers, the Our Side tier and the Ineffable tier. The Our Side tier, you do get early access. I'm going to be doing more behind the scenes stuff. You can also subscribe to my Patreon. That's patreon.com/narcissistiville. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, stay devilish and see you next Tuesday.